Fear is in the air, and many are worrying, is my bank safe? Let's start with the facts. 3 major banks in the United States have failed in a short period of time: Silvergate, Signature Bank, and Silicon Valley Bank. They all experienced a run on the banks when too many people demand too much money too fast, and the banks don't have cash on hand. Now, one of the safest investments is considered to be treasury bonds. But what happens if interest rates rise really quickly? Well, suddenly you have this 5-year bond you bought a year ago, which gives you 1% a year. But now the government is selling the same 5-year bond and offering 5%. Because of that, now your bond's value on the open market drops. It's no longer even worth what you paid for it. But the essence of it is this: banks were forced to sell long-term assets that they didn't want to sell, like bonds, and they took losses because of these bank runs. Because of that, what started as a liquidity crisis became an insolvency crisis, and that's why they got shut down, because they weren't going to be able to service all those withdrawals. So now what? U.S. government is stepping in to save not only Silicon Valley Bank, but also Signature Bank as well. However, not everyone saw this as a win. Many were quick to point out that, once again, the government only seems to step in to help a certain type of person. I do have to tell you that those in favor of the Fed's actions will tell you that this is an unfair characterization, that it's not the super rich getting bailed out. They'll point out that this isn't a traditional bailout at all because it only applies to the depositors, and that executives and shareholders will get nothing. And that sounds good, except for the fact that some executives and shareholders in Silicon Valley Bank had already cashed out, with Greg Becker, the CEO.
Yeah, they didn't even need the fucking bailout because they basically got their own bailout before the entire collapse happened in the first place, because they knew what was going to happen, and they basically did insider trading before the entire thing collapsed. To explain this fully, there was a bill put in place after the 2008 financial crash, which was supposed to prevent the Great Recession from happening again. And they put all of these regulations in place for the banks. And basically, a lot of these large banks, like Silicon Valley Bank, came along and were like, oh, hang on, maybe these regulations that you're trying to put in place after this crash, maybe they shouldn't apply to us. Dodd-Frank, yes, that's basically the regulations that they lobbied against, including the actual, I believe, CEO of Silicon Valley Bank. He actually lobbied against Dodd-Frank. He lobbied to have Dodd-Frank repealed because Dodd-Frank was put into place after the 2008 Great Recession. Dodd-Frank was put into place because they realized that there were so many issues with the banking system after 2008, which is true. And they put Dodd-Frank in place to try and mitigate those issues that happened because of the financial crash. Dodd-Frank was supposed to protect consumers, and it was supposed to prevent banks from getting too big to fail. It didn't really do that, did it? What Dodd-Frank was supposed to do, it was supposed to restrict banks from basically rating mortgage bonds as AAA rating when they weren't actually AAA, because if you've watched The Big Short, you'll know that basically a large part of why the 2008 Great Recession happened was because they'd basically found a loophole where they could rate mortgage-backed securities as AAA rated when actually they weren't AAA rated. They were actually AAA rated as meant to mean these are very low risk investments that you're definitely going to get your money back on. That's what AAA is meant to mean, but the banks had found a sort of loophole which meant that they could buy very, 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 very risky mortgage bonds and rate them as AAA when they weren't actually AAA. But what they could do is package them in with other mortgage bonds that were actually AAA, with ones that were like triple C or triple Z, and sell that entire bond of mortgage securities as if they were AAA and very safe to other investors. And that's a large part of why the financial crash happened, because they found this loophole that they exploited as much as they possibly could. And when Dodd-Frank came into law, that was meant to stop that from happening. But You know, Dodd-Frank, it wasn't perfect. They brought that into regulation after 2008, and that was supposed to stop that from happening again. But at the same time, it wasn't perfect because basically it stopped banks, especially smaller banks, from investing in riskier mortgage assets and incentivized them to invest in safer assets, i.e., incentivize them to loan out to people who were basically like safer people to loan out to, i.e., rich people who had a lot of collateral rather than poorer people who were trying to buy houses. So basically what Dodd-Frank did was it might have made the banking system a little bit safer, but at the same time, it wasn't pumping money into the working class or even the middle class, the people who were trying to buy houses. It wasn't pumping money into that section of society at all. It was pumping money into the people who already had assets and collateral because they were the safer people to grant loans to. So in a way, Dodd-Frank made the banking sector more regulated and more safe, but in another way, it was also restricting normal working people from buying properties, and home ownership, especially in America, has reduced a lot since Dodd-Frank came into place. So basically, a lot of Republicans came along and said, Dodd-Frank is killing smaller banks because it's restricting them from lending out to people who want to be able to buy houses, or it's restricting small businesses from making risks. They were kind of right in a way. Banks were not incentivized to pump money into any new risky assets, i.e. small companies that were trying to do something new. And that's what Donald Trump campaigned on when he was trying to get the presidency. And then when he got the presidency, he repealed Dodd-Frank, and basically a lot of the banking regulations that were put in place after 2008 were repealed under Donald Trump because he signed a bill in 2018 which repealed a lot of Dodd-Frank because he said that that would stimulate the economy if we basically allowed these banks to do whatever the fuck they want to do. Which is not the way to do it. Basically, Dodd-Frank was not perfect, but also the way that Donald Trump approached it and a lot of other Republicans, they were like, well, what we need to do is just repeal it and go backwards. When in reality, Dodd-Frank was not perfect, but what we needed to do was learn from the mistakes that Dodd-Frank had made because it wasn't perfect, and progress from the mistakes that were made from Dodd-Frank and create new regulations as a result of learning from Dodd-Frank. But this whole sort of crash situation happened because of the repeal of Dodd-Frank, and the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank was one of the guys that actually personally lobbied US Congress to get Dodd-Frank repealed, and they fucking won. The regulation was, if you have assets of over 250 billion, then you have to abide by these rules. It was basically a rule put in place to be like, oh, if you're a bank that is this big and you have assets over $250 billion, then you have to abide by these rules. You've got to the point where you're too big to fail, so therefore you must abide by these rules to prevent causing the entire economy to crash. And all of these big players from these huge banks got together and lobbied the US government to say, actually, I think you should only apply this to banks that have assets over this certain amount. And Silicon Valley Bank managed to lobby their way out of this regulation. After they managed to successfully lobby the American government to be like, all right, you shouldn't be subject to these specific regulations that we're putting in place after 2008, they were like, oh, well, now we've managed to get that. We probably don't need a risk management officer anymore, do we? Because we don't even need to manage risk anymore because we've managed to lobby the US government to a point where we don't need to even care about how much we're putting our depositors under risk anymore because we can privatize our profits and socialize our risks now. It's like they literally realized that they were too big to fail because they'd managed to lobby the US government into them being too big to fail. We don't need to worry about bailing out our customers anymore if we fail, because we can just rely on the taxpayer to do that now. So what we'll do is we'll just not even have a risk management officer on our board at all and just do whatever the fuck we want, because we're Silicon Valley guys And we think tech investments are the future and they're really not risky at all. We don't have to worry about risk anymore because we'll get fucking bailed out if everything goes wrong. And guess what? That's what they fucking did. Everything went wrong. And who paid? Technically, it's like the banking sector as a whole that's paying for this fuck up right now. But the FDIC is paid for by the banking sector. So the FDIC is like an insurance payment that all of the banking sector pays into. They all pay a payment into the FDIC. If one bank fails, then everybody gets paid out of this FDIC fund. All of the depositors get paid out of the FDIC fund. And it's meant to be up to $250,000, but 93 to 97% of deposits in SVB were actually above that amount because SVB wasn't really a consumer bank. It was more of a venture capitalist bank. So they were like, well, if we keep to the usual FDIC regulations here, we're not going to be making barely anybody whole here at all. So they broke the rules and they basically said, well, the $250,000 threshold is not going to apply anymore and we're going to fill everybody's hole, guys, is what they basically said. But they're going to fill it with the FDIC money. But if they realize that they can't fill it, if they can't fill everybody's hole with the FDIC money, then they've got a backstop and they're going to be filling it with taxpayer money. We're still waiting to see whether they're going to have to use taxpayer money or not, or whether they're going to be able to do it with money from the banks. We don't know yet. Biden said taxpayers aren't bearing the burden. Yeah. Technically, for now, they're not. But that doesn't mean that they won't be eventually. They're relying on the FDIC funds to bail out the depositors because over 95% of depositors on SVB were like over the FDIC threshold. But if the FDIC fund can't make all of those people whole eventually, if they can't fill the holes of all of the investors, then they're going to have to turn to the backstop, i.e. they're going to have to turn to the taxpayer. The message that they've sent out by basically disregarding the whole ceiling of what you're protected with the FDIC. It's basically sending out a message to the entire American economy, which is like, you're insured no matter what, which is basically saying like, your risks are going to be socialized while your profits are going to be privatized. You get your yields back personally. Whereas if you fail, if you take risks, if you lose on that, well, your losses are going to be socialized. Either the FDIC or the taxpayer are going to pay for them and you won't have to pay for your silly little risks. That's the way capitalism works, baby. Is this a new Johnny Harris video on the collapse? Interesting.
Something big is going on here.
As of this morning, Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB, has gone under completely.
The second biggest bank collapse in U.S. history.
The bank is called the Silicon Valley Bank, or we're going to call it SVB in this video.
It is the epicenter of tech startups, venture capital.
And it is now effectively dead. The government is scrambling to keep us all calm while this bank fails.
Your deposits will be there when you need them.
The American banking system is really safe and well capitalized.
That's because we live in a system that doesn't work if everyone freaks out at the same time. The system relies on all of us keeping a feeling of safety. If that doesn't happen, the system falls apart. And that's what I'm going to explain today. So let me show you how this happened, how this bank failed, and what it means for you and me. But
he's absolutely right that this is a system that relies on us not all freaking out at the same time. A lot of the reason for Silicon Valley Bank failing is because people were tweeting and being in group chats and Slack chats, WhatsApp chats, saying that Silicon Valley Bank is about to collapse and therefore creating massive hype and then causing everybody to take their money out at the same time. But also it was definitely down to Peter Thiel being like, you should definitely take your money out right now. Like Peter Thiel, my favorite billionaire. You know Peter Thiel is my favorite billionaire. He literally tweeted everybody should be taking their money out of Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank right now. Peter Thiel owns the Founders Fund, which is the largest venture capital fund out there. Everybody is invested in that and they had huge investments in Silicon Valley Bank. Peter Thiel basically said to the Founders Fund, he's basically the god of the Founders Fund. And he basically told everybody in the Founders Fund to take everything out of Silicon Valley Bank. As soon as he said that, everybody took all of their money out of Silicon Valley Bank. And when that happened, what do you know? He created this massive fucking bank run because everybody fucking panicked. Because everybody follows what Peter Thiel does. Because he's one of the biggest billionaires in the entire world. That's what our economy is based on nowadays. It's based on the confidence of what the richest people do. It's not what it should be based on, but it's what it is based on nowadays because our entire economy is based on financial instruments, financial assets. It's not based on actual products bringing value to actual people anymore. No, it's based on financial assets and billionaires. Whatever fucking billionaires say that we should be investing our money into, that's what our economy is based on nowadays. Whatever fucking Peter Thiel says, that's what we should be investing our money into nowadays. Right, we're 1 minute into this Johnny Harris video and I've already gone off.
Okay, so banks only hold on to 10% of my money and the other 90% they are investing in the world. And this is kind of scary. Governments know that this is kind of scary, and they also know that our society and our economy is built on us keeping our money in the bank, not freaking out, not everyone all of a sudden going and pulling it out. So, to make us all sleep better at night, they promise that if a bank ever does anything reckless with our money or they accidentally lose it while they're out there investing, that the government will make up the difference, that the government will pay us back for any money that we lost, at least up to $250,000. It's kind of like a...
I mean, not the government. It's supposed to be the banks that pay into the FDIC.
Everyone's...
Not the government.
Stay calm, we'll pay you back if you lose it. Just don't everyone go at the same time and pull out your money, please. The whole system relies on it. Can we just chill? And we can chill, as long as we don't have more than $250,000 in our bank account. Okay, but here's the next part of the perfect storm that really starts to heat all this up. Remember that SVB's customers are startups. Startups raise money from venture funds, and they take that money and they deposit it into SVB, and that is how SVB gets its money to operate, to invest with. But during this recent economic downturn, startups haven't been able to raise as much money, and thus SVB hasn't had as much money coming in the door. And so they start pulling on their reserves, and they realize they kind of have to figure out a way to get more money. And it's not going to come from startups because startups aren't raising. So they turn to their bonds. They're like, we've got tons of our customers' money in these really safe bonds. They're at low interest rates. We probably need to sell some of them off to like get some cash in our reserves to like meet all of our needs and the withdrawals and all of that. So they sell off a bunch of their bonds. And this is where things start to go really, really wrong. They announce that they're selling their bonds and they have to sell them early. And yes, we bought them at a lower interest rate and now the interest rate is higher. So we're actually selling them at a loss, and that loss is actually $2 billion. Okay, like again, banks have to deal with this kind of stuff. This isn't great for them, but it's...
Their massive downfall is that their CEO, I believe, literally announced on Twitter that they were having to do this. And literally tweeted the words, "Don't panic!"
But then, this is where it starts to get really bad. They go out and announce that they're going to be raising money from other investors. They're like going out looking for money. They're like, hey, yeah, we sold off the bonds. We also need you guys to invest in our bank so that we can just stay good. Everyone stay calm. It's not a big deal. We just need to raise a little money. Everyone stay calm. The best way to like get people to freak out is to be like, stay calm. It's actually not that big of a deal. We're fine. We just need to raise some money and we're selling bonds at a loss.
Oh my God. Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay
I declare bankruptcy!
calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm.
Okay, so now the moment that deals the final blow to all of this. All of these founders and venture firms, they're all talking to each other because they're all in the same community, in the same area, all in the same business. They're all in the same WhatsApp groups, and they're all like, hey guys, what's going on with SVB? All of our bank. Why are they raising money? Why are they selling their bonds early? Is my money not safe? And so, like a herd of bison frightened by a loud bang, a stampede of very wealthy founders and startups in Central California start pulling out their money from SVB,
including Mr. Peter fucking Thiel. Also, who's that other guy? What's his name? Jason Calacanis. This guy, where's his tweet where he was literally like, everyone, we need to panic. Basically, people were tweeting during this crash. But that's the thing, like what all of these like venture capitalist / crypto guys do these days is if you're going to panic about a banking crash, what you need to do is to be the guy that fucking panics first. This is the state that the banking sector is in nowadays. If you have a lot of your money in investments in certain assets and you even have for a second any kind of reservations into how you think that those assets are going to perform in the short term, if you think for any reason that they might not perform in a way that will bring you back amazing returns, then you need to be the first person who literally tweets out going, we need to panic right now. If everything crashes, the most important thing at this point is you're the one who gets out first and you're the one who causes everybody else to panic. That's the only thing that matters. As long as you're the one who's able to pull their money out first and everybody else is the one who panics and gets left with the bag, that's all that matters nowadays. Because everybody's money is all in these financial assets that are literally, they're dependent on people's confidence that they will bring back returns on their investments. That's literally what most of the banking sector is reliant on these days. It's reliant on confidence. And if the largest investors in that field, i.e. Peter Thiel or people like this guy on Twitter, are like, oh, I'm panicking right now and I'm taking all of my money out, then that causes loads of other people to take their money out as well. And that can cause massive bank runs and financial crashes. That is the stage of capitalism that we're in these days, guys. That's what happens. Financial crashes are dictated by, in a large part, people on Twitter. It's great. It's just fucking wonderful.
So yes, by Friday, federal regulators stepped in and seized control of SVB's assets. It'll go down as the second largest bank collapse in history. When you let banks fail, you force them to feel the consequences of their decisions on how they manage their banks. But when you let banks fail, you also create this feeling of anxiety that is contagious. And right now, there already is a bit of an economic anxiety flooding around our country. Inflation is high, there's war, there's increased competition with China and trade barriers. People are slightly on edge. And so the government swooped in with 150% of their might to make everyone feel safe. They didn't want to ignite this into another 2008 style meltdown. This was the safer approach. I guess for me, I'm slightly concerned that this may lead to just more reckless risk taking because we're kind of sending a signal to these banks that like, hey, if you fail, even the kind of smaller ones, we will probably bail you out. Which again is a good thing. This helps quell any chaos, especially in the short term. We don't have people freaking out. We have no reason to go run and pull out all of our money now. And importantly, people who have money in small regional banks feel secure. They're not going to take out all their money and put it in like banks that are too big to fail. But in the long run, it could just mean banks will feel emboldened to continue with bigger and bigger bets, knowing that the government will bail them out, knowing that there's not real consequences, knowing that they'll get their bonuses.
Socialize your losses,
the debate
baby.
is heating up now in a new way. You're going to see a lot of fighting. You're going to see a lot of Elizabeth Warren, who is very smart on this stuff and also very bullish about regulating banks.
Bullish on Warren.
Another financial crisis.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, when the crash comes, the big banks will throw up their hands and say, it's not their fault. Nobody could have seen it coming. And then they'll run to Congress and beg for bailout money. And let's be blunt, they'll probably get it.
And what happens next is we will witness if this government intervention actually worked. If the government successfully calmed us all down so that the system can keep going. Or if this panic will continue to spread, leading to more bank runs, more failed banks, and a stark reminder that our modern financial system is a mental construct that leads us to all work together for the prosperity and growth of our society until, that is, the dominoes start to fall.
They knew the taxpayers would bail them out. They weren't being stupid.
Oh,
They
the
just
Big
didn't care.
Short.
Yeah, because they're fucking crooks. But at least we're going to see some of them go to jail. Right? I mean, they're going to have to break up the banks. I mean, the party's over.
I don't know. I have a feeling And in a few years, people are going to be doing what they always do when the economy tanks.
Oh, yeah.
They will be blaming immigrants and poor people.
Yeah. There we go, baby. That is what it all fucking comes down to, isn't it? The Big Short got it just perfectly.